Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. If you just tuned in, if you were coming in a little bit late, we started a few minutes early because we were working on doing an unboxing for a bunch of community items that were sent to us. But this is the time for our regularly scheduled, or the scheduled at least for this time, since Vi likes to mix up the times. But this is the time for our scheduled live Q&A. So I'm Jeremy Walsh. I'm the owner and creative director at Soulbound Studios. On my left, I have Miguel Souzou Sierra, technical designer and world builder for Chronicles of Elyria.
Howdy.
On my right, you have Jason Death Welter, the UI UX designer for Chronicles of Elyria. So we're going to be spending some time today doing a live Q&A based on questions that were submitted to us over a Reddit stream. At the same time, make sure you guys are tuning into the Twitch commentary. On the right-hand side, there's going to be questions and stuff, not questions, conversation being happening between some of our other team members. We've got our producer, Vi is going to be on there.
Yep. We have a desync between the sound and video.
Dun dun dun!
Alright, I'll let the sound engineers fix that.
Masons and built?
No, I just meant them. Do we know when it's going to be fixed?
So what's the game you've been playing recently?
Which one?
The one with the weird, like, almost random name.
Oh.
With the physics-based combat system?
Exanima?
Examina.
Examina. Yeah.
Right. Like, how am I supposed to remember that?
Yeah.
The name
Do
doesn't...
we know what's going on with the audio?
Well, there's a lag, so we gotta wait.
How many hours have you played into it?
Just
Just
if
like
I keep talking, is it going to catch up, or is it eventually going to desync again?
No, it should get
It's
done.
hard.
Right.
It's really, really hard.
In a good way?
In a good way. It's challenging. Should give it a go.
Oh, by the way, Miguel.
Yeah.
Everybody really loves the way you look.
Oh, that's too kind.
Oh.
What
You're
about
like-
the way I look? I have the impressive shirt on today.
But Miguel
What
looks
does that
like a, quote, young entrepreneur college boy?
Young,
Entrepreneur.
intrepid entrepreneur?
Sorry.
College boy?
You are my.
I'll take
my,
it.
My stool is dropping.
I'm not moving. I'm not even doing anything. You all saw that. And by that I mean nothing. Because I didn't do anything.
All right, there we go.
I slowly
Anyways,
raised my stool over the street.
how are we doing on audio? Are we good?
It's good.
All right, we're good. Okay.
Yay.
So as we were saying, we're going to be doing our live Q&A. I'm not going to redo the introductions, but we do have Vi as well as several of our other team members on the Twitch stream. So as you guys are conversing, you might find that some questions that you have or follow-up questions are going to be fielded by them, not by us. We have our document here. I printed off. It is like 8 pages of questions. What I did is I went through and curated the questions that people have asked, and I grouped them by category to make sure that they're as coherent and relatable as possible, so it should be fairly easy to follow. And then I took a look at the highly upvoted questions, as well as some of the lower voted questions that I thought were interesting and fun to answer, and we just kind of put them all together. So we're going to do the best we can to get through as many of these as we can. My goal is to make this the most informative, most interesting Q&A we've done thus far. So with that in mind, and pleasantries aside, let's dive in.
No pressure.
Question number 1 comes from Lucy Lioness. She asks, how is the overall studio's morale? You've been in full production for a bit, and I hope everyone is doing okay. I wanted to start this off as a kind of a smooth, gentle introduction. We're doing great. I think everybody is doing fantastic. The morale is really good right now. It's been a good year. Our 1-year anniversary from our Kickstarter is actually coming up starting on Monday. It's been 1 year on Wednesday technically, but we're beginning our anniversary celebrations on Monday. In the last year, so much has been accomplished. We've moved into the new studio. We've got so much done on the back end. The front end is looking amazing. We've got the so much more on the lore.
Cut back on beatings.
The tribes. The beatings slowed down once morale
A
improved.
little bit.
So no, the team is doing really, really well. Although you're drizzling. That's right. I just rub it in too. You had a kid.
I had a kid.
Yeah.
So that was a slight...
That went.
But we're getting back up there.
Yeah.
This apple juice is certainly helping with the morale, for sure.
But thank you for asking. The team is doing quite well. We continue to hire. We are well over 20 people now. We actually do have 2 new people joining us in the studio in May and June. We have our new...
Three.
Three?
Three. We have a new client, our senior client engineer. We have our new community manager. And then...
I think so.
The House of D has fallen.
Oh no. All right.
You'll be dethroned by the end of the.
We'll have to see what's going to happen
Actually-
with that. And then we have our
Communities.
community support lead. So a lot more community focus, making sure that you guys are feeling like we're hearing you, that you have a voice, and then also that there's a good line of communication from us to you. I imagine that when our new community manager, kind of community producer comes on, we're going to be doing a lot more videos for you guys, a lot more in-game content, some other fun things we might do to let you guys kind of see what it's like development in the studio. And that just felt, I saw the reflection there.
That's okay.
In the glass. So all kinds of new community stuff coming along, and it feels good when we get new people in the office. It keeps it fresh and lively, and yeah. So moving on. Mick Dude asks, how does Caspian like his rum? Another easy lob at us, and then we'll get into the serious ones. That one apparently Vi alluded to, so I will just let you know that I like my rum neat, without ice, room temperature, and preferably not cheap. Oh, decanted? Yeah, I'm one of those weird people that decants my rum too, just for like a week at most. But I do like it. It sweetens it and makes it smoother. All right, let's get into the fun stuff now. Will you keep developing the game technically? Very Hasted asks, will you keep developing the game technically, graphics, etc. during the period of Elyria, as one can reckon the technology will be more advanced in, say, 5+ years? Very Hasted, one of the reasons we chose to use the Unreal Engine is because it is constantly under development. If you take a look at games even developed, a year or two ago versus the ones now, you'll see a constant improvements in the material systems, in the crafting and AI, sound systems, the skeletal animation and skinning, and all kinds of other cool stuff. And so by basing our game on that client, it means that as the Unreal Engine continues to evolve, obviously through Epic's development and through other licensees that kind of contribute back towards the Unreal Engine. As they're making improvements to that, we actually get the benefit of those. So we hope that the game engine never looks stale and that it always looks, better and better as we go along. All right. Batista Marcelf asks, with the new investment in the website, I was wondering if it would be possible for Soulbound to expose APIs with capabilities like OpenAuth and access to general account information like titles, influence points, and items purchased, so the community can leverage and create apps to help bring the community together in new ways. I was talking to our engineers earlier today, and that is absolutely one of the things that we plan on doing. We're in the process of refactoring a lot of our backend system right now, particularly so that we can expose those APIs to you guys. It also makes it so that our website and our game engine are all using the same kind of basic platform and API system. But yes, our plan is to expose those to you guys so that you can write apps and extensions. All right, Nagash asks, were there any alternative names for the game that were considered before settling on Chronicles of Elyria, and what were they? This is actually a fun question for me. Chronicles of Elyria as a game is actually a relatively recent idea, maybe within the last 4 or 5 years. Even though the engine in development has been in design for like 17 years, the actual game itself, Chronicles of Elyria, is only about 5 years old. So in that regards, it hasn't changed. Most of the focus has been designing the individual mechanics and features and what we wanted out of what I wanted out of the ideal MMO. The story, the lore, the background, all this stuff is much more recent. So the name Chronicles of Elyria has been there since the game existed in our current incarnation. However, the whole concept of Chronicles of Elyria began with the design document I wrote back in 2000 for what was ultimately going to be initially a text-based MUD, and then converted into kind of a 2D game, since that's what MUDs were, or that's what MMOs were back at the time, or kind of isometric top-down. And that kind of graphical and text-based MUD that I was writing the design document for was called Taviran, and it was based on the Wheel of Time. My idea, my goal, in my mind, the ideal idea was to submit it to Robert Jordan and get license approval to base either a graphical MUD or a game on the Wheel of Time franchise. Unfortunately, at the time it was just kind of a novel idea for me. It wasn't anything more than a brainchild that I continued to iterate on, and as audience knows, Robert Jordan passed away before I ever got a chance to talk to about this. But that being said, I do hear that there is going to be a new Wheel of Time TV show coming up soon, which is fantastic. And obviously the idea of Chronicles of Elyria is radically different now from what it was back in 2000. So it no longer resembles anything related to Wheel of Time, but it was certainly inspired by the Wheel of Time and Robert Jordan. So, all right, next category. That was all focused on kind of the team and other stuff. Let's get into the next section. There's been a lot of conversation lately about population caps. So under the settlement, domain, selection, management topic, one of the questions asked was, will total characters in a server be capped at 100,000? That's a great question. The short answer to that is no. In my mind, I would really like that 100,000 to be the minimum standard, not the maximum. One of the nice things about using Spatial OS as our backend technology is that it scales out virtually infinitely horizontally, which means that we can make the continent as large as we want it to be. We can make the overall globe or map as large as we want it to be, and we can fit virtually as many players as we want to scattered across the realm. The technical challenge with really any massively multiplayer game right now isn't about how large the server or the world can be, it's how many people you can get in a single settlement. Because no matter how good the technology is, the limitations of physics mean that when you get hundreds or thousands of people in a small confined area, it becomes extremely difficult to manage all that on the client side. But we do have a really large world, and so our goal is that while we want to hit that 100,000 mark early on, over time we hope that it hits 200 or 250 or really as much as it can be.
To be fair, there could be constraints.
There could be. I mean, we don't know yet.
We don't necessarily want to have X amount of people. There might be design reasons why we want to cap it at 200 or 250.
Right.
I mean, it's really up in the air right now, but who knows?
The short answer, though, is no. 100,000 is not a hard cap. So it's not like when the 100,000th player comes in or a character that we're just going to suddenly stop people from joining that server. I don't think that's the plan right now. In fact, I know it's not. All right. Talakern Baron asks, will taxes be levied on NPCs and players alike via contracts or some other mechanism like a tax collector table GUI? And how does that relate to the collection of taxes? Example, all players must make a trip to this table to pay their taxes, or do you foresee a more automated system? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so we talked about that recently, in fact. And essentially, implicit contracts are the contracts that basically deal with taxes. So you enter a kingdom, and there's an implicit contract saying that you're going to have to pay taxes. There are explicit contracts, though, that you can make with your count or whoever essentially is the leader of your settlement that gives different variables for what you might pay in tax. So essentially there will be, I believe, a set amount of tax that is the implicit contract. So if you live somewhere, there's an implicit understanding that there are taxes that you have to pay. And likely you'll have to travel to a deposit box or something like that, similar to the idea of, what do you call it, a GUI? Yeah, a collector table GUI, so something like that. However, you can go and talk and make individual contracts, explicit contracts with your count or whoever, again,
Mayor.
runs a settlement, right, mayor, baron, individually. And so if you're thinking you have a good argument for why you should actually be paying this amount versus this amount, you can try and negotiate with whoever is running the show, and so yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So will tax be levies on NPCs and players alike via contracts? Yes.
Yeah.
Let's see. How does that relate to the collection of taxes? So to follow up on that, so they'll be able to bring the taxes into like a strong box or something like that. But whether it's an implicit contract or an explicit contract, if they fail to do that, then you can use the bounty system to go ahead and send somebody out to collect those taxes. And if the implicit law says things like, if you don't pay your taxes on time, then there's a 10% penalty, then using the bounty token, the tax collector would be able to go collect that 100% that you owed plus the 10% in interest.
Right.
Let's see. Do you foresee a more automated system? I think we want an automated system where we can. There's this kind of fine line that we're doing with this game between, adding the realistic elements like needing to travel in order to deliver objects with a more automated approach that we want so that people don't feel like they have to micromanage things. So, being able to initiate a bounty on people so that a tax collector can come in and pick up that bounty and then go collect that money without you having to be online using a companion app or just doing it using an in-game GUI and not have to go manually pick it up yourself or not having to walk around and shout in the streets looking for a tax collector. Like, we want to automate that part of it, but we still like the idea of having people manually go and collect the taxes themselves. It also means that people who don't want to pay have an opportunity to defend and to decline to pay, and then it gets all kinds of cool.
Yeah.
So yeah. Can you give us information, following along on the tax conversation, can you give us information on how tax-free EP land is supposed to or intended to work? So I can. So one of the things we had talked about in a previous Q&A was that the nobility and aristocracy, specifically the counts, have ownership or management responsibility for the parcels of land within their county. But the people who were buying land using the EP system don't have a negotiated contract out of the gate. So there's no negotiation as to how much they would pay initially. And I told people not to worry about that there was kind of a system in place to handle that you should still do a negotiation, but that we were going to leave that for after the fact. So let me expound on that a little bit. As Souzou was talking about a minute ago, with the implicit laws in place, the count can actually set a global tax rate for the entire county. So if your parcel of land lies within this region, or if it's got these resources on it, things like that, then this is the amount of taxes that you owe. And so everybody then would be prone to that tax rate, regardless of whether or not they negotiated a contract. However, if you were one of those people who purchased land as a result of your EP, while that is the default tax rate, you have the opportunity to go to your account during exposition and negotiate a cheaper rate, which we encourage you to do so, because those are the people who are going to be there in the early days trying to help make sure that the county succeeds. The reason we are kind of refactoring it to work like this is we felt like that it was better to put the onus of responsibility on, what was the word that you used, fighting for yourself, or?
Being an agent of your own.
Yeah.
Of your own cause.
Yeah, being an agent of your own cause. We wanted the agent of cause to be lying with the individual property owners and not with the counts, because we felt like that put a lot of responsibility on the counts. It also posed a significant disadvantage to them. Well, not a significant. It was a fairly small disadvantage because the number of parcels of land that are actually going to be consumed through the EP system is relatively small compared to the overall number of parcels in a county. But this felt like a good system overall. You know, they set the global tax rate for people who are going to be coming into the game after launch, or just whatever they feel is comfortable. And then the individuals that purchase land through the EP system during exposition can go to the count and negotiate a cheaper rate if they can work it out. Now, the opposite is also true. If a count comes in and sets a super high tax rate at the very beginning, something that's uncomfortable for the landowners who exist during exposition, they might find themselves overthrown even before exposition ends and launch begins. So you got to make sure you balance that.
Very much so.
To what extent will land deformation sculpting be implemented? Will I be able to carve a city out of the face of a mountain, like a Dwarven Hall or Minas Tirith? Do you want to touch on that? You want to touch on it?
I mean, no, probably not. I mean, that's very difficult. As detailed as Minas Tirith, probably not. I mean, I don't know what.
I think they're asking more about mechanics. So,
okay.
We got the tunneling system. So, to what extent will land deformation sculpting be implemented? So we don't have terraforming.
Right.
So you can't raise and lower the terrain or anything like that. We do have the tunneling system. So you could use that to dig out caves and caverns. And as we talk about the tribes in our upcoming design journal, there are tribes that use those caves and caverns and mines more specifically. But your ability to ultimately modify the terrain is relatively low.
It's not going to be like ZBrush. You're never going to have ZBrush. You're never even going to have half of ZBrush. But you might have like 1/10 of ZBrush. You know, you're never going to be able to carve George Washington or...
You might be able to punch a hole.
Zoltra's face into a carving or something.
Oh, be nice. Oh, I thought you said punch Zoltra Smith. Punch Zoltra. Never mind.
Why would I do that?
No, I mean, I like Zoltra.
So I've got a follow-up question
Okay.
for myself, but like,
Okay.
All right.
Follow-up question from myself, please.
Now, how do you spell that?
my name?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Just ask your question.
Okay, so with the tunneling system, is it possible to carve out something like the Silver Run mine, for example?
Yeah, so the idea is that Silver Run Mine is a good example of what kind of things you can do. Obviously, the Silver Run Mine was more hand-tailored because we wanted it to really demonstrate the parkour system and kind of what mobility looks like, but we didn't want it to be too far from what people can expect. So it functions similar in the sense that you need to dig things out, you need to add supports and beams and platforms and scaffolding and things like that.
I should follow that up by saying that a lot of the formation, a lot of the geology you see inside of Silver Run Mine is a result of natural formations. So a lot of the mine was formed with those natural cave systems already in place. You're not going to be able to get that kind of organic composition.
Not using the tunneling tools.
Not using the tunneling
But
tools.
you might find things like that elsewhere.
Yeah, but I want to clarify.
That's true.
There's no like make the room circular and organic looking button, and we just couldn't do that. But like you said, you could run across caves and build with your tunneling system from that. But yeah, so just so you know.
Yeah. What is the progress on tunneling and mining? We actually haven't done much on it at this point. The tunneling and mining system, I kind of want to point that out. It was a highly rated question. The tunneling and mining system was actually one of our...
There goes the rest of it.
That did not make it. The tunneling and mining system was one of our stretch goals, so we deferred starting on that until a little bit later. We've been designing it. We know the tools and how the user experience for that is going to work to a large degree, but we haven't actually started technical implementation on that. But Nathan and I and Steve, our lead server programmer and our client programmer, have been talking quite a bit about what the user interface looks like from an engineering standpoint and kind of how that's going to be stored on the back end from a data standpoint. So we're pretty confident and comfortable in how things are going to work. We just haven't actually begun engineering on that system yet. Follow-up question on tunneling. Do I have to own land to tunnel? That was another highly upvoted question, but it was answered in a previous Q&A. You do not have to own the land in order to tunnel. Yeah. Cool.
But, keep in mind, land laws still apply.
Yeah. What?
Like, if you tunnel underneath someone's property, you don't just get, like, if they find that you're tunneling underneath their property, you can't be like, it's not technically on the ground, so it's my property. Like, it's still probably going to be constituted as their property.
Yeah, I think property lines would probably go.
Property lines are infinitely low.
Yeah, so.
Kaileron asked, awkward page turn.
Yeah.
Will resource mines simply be a cottage, dig a hole endeavor? Will players need to create large-scale, similar to Silver Run industrial mines that require many players and/or NPCs to operate efficiently?
Well, yeah, that's for sure the goal. There are a lot of interesting and intricate parts that go into a mine, and there's also a lot of problems that are created from trying to create a mine, and that's interesting. That's fun. That gives you something to do and engage with. If it was just a button press, that's boring. If it was something you could do by yourself, that's not realistic and also boring. So yes, there are going to be lots of struggles that you can't solve or handle individually, and it's going to need to be a community thing. And when I say community, I mean, you can hire employees. It's not like, like you're necessarily like, yeah, let's go build a mine together. But
You might.
You might, and you can. But it's definitely not a one-man gig, and
No.
it's not a simple endeavor. It's difficult. You have to there's technology that you have to develop. So if you can't build that technology, you don't have the skills. You're gonna need someone who has that. There's a lot of the physical tunneling that has to be undergone, and I mean
Tools and resources and biomes. Not all biomes are suitable for tunneling.
Sure, but I mean even regardless of the biome, just the people cost. There is a people cost, and it's more than one.
Yeah. What takes precedent, an implicit contract or an explicit contract? We actually answered that previously.
Yeah,
An explicit contract takes precedence over implicit contracts.
Yes.
So here's another question. With domain settlement selection coming up, as well as some other things, I wanted to address this question. So Anders Castange asks, in regards to property rights, to what extent does a settlement leader, whether it's a fledgling settlement or a giant city, possess the ability to set the layout of the town? For example, will they set the size of land parcels? Can they set where those parcels go so that they may create de facto streets? Do they need to own the parcels of land to build walls, or is that an intrinsic right in leading the settlement? So there's a lot of questions there. Let me address them as individuals. To what extent does a settlement leader possess the ability to set the layout of the town? So there are a couple of options during exposition. The first of which is to take control of an existing settlement. That's what we consider the default approach, because you're going to get a lot of resources from an existing settlement. Plus, the existing settlement's going to be generated in a location that we know is sustainable for the most part, and so your likelihood of surviving there are going to be easier. Plus, there's already a population of NPCs in that settlement, so chances of having people that cover a wide range of occupations are already there. So by and large, you're going to want to start with an existing settlement. If you do that, then you're going to have an opportunity to place buildings down in unoccupied parcels, as well as to expand the radius, as well as to pay resources for the NPCs to upgrade their existing buildings and things like that. You cannot uproot the NPCs in their current locations and move the buildings around. So it's not like a design phase where
It's not SimCity.
It's not a creative mode. It's not like SimCity. Yeah, exactly. The idea is you're coming into an established settlement as but theoretically as a new ruler of that settlement, and now you're giving them the resources, the NPCs that exist, to build up the things that they own, as well as to build things yourself as a landowner in that settlement in the places that you feel like it's going to be most advantageous. On the other hand, you can go off someplace and start a new settlement. It's a more expensive process. It's going to take a little time to attract the NPCs and stuff that you need there, but it gives you complete control over the layout and everything like that. But like I said, your chances of survival in a startup settlement like that, especially if you're doing it on your own, are significantly more challenging.
Civil engineering.
Yeah.
Oh, quick note.
Yes.
The name you mentioned earlier, the chat keeps scrolling up. There's Anders
Castan.
Castagna.
Ah.
Yeah is in parentheses. I don't know if there's an accent on it. Is it Castagna
It's
or Castagna?
Castan.
Castagna. You're right.
Castagna.
It is. I did not read down to the signature. I was just reading the title. So my apologies. Castagna. Nice name. All right. Also, parcels are fixed. So the entire world map, all terrain is divided up into parcels of 64 meter by 64 meters. So they're not things that you can move around. Can set where those parcels go? No. May they create de facto streets? You can lay out roads and streets, sort of. Depends upon how advanced your technology is.
Yeah, you
What's
have
a
to build
street?
out.
If you build a bunch of buildings around,
Paths,
an
gravel.
empty path, comes.
You can lay gravel and other stuff down in order to make sure that it's not overgrown again, but we don't have streets yet.
And there are travel modifiers
Right.
to the types of terrain. So.
Yeah, depending upon what you're walking on will change how fast and slow and how easy it is for you to move around, how much stamina it takes. Vitality. Did you just use... Never mind. All right, moving on. The next set of questions are related to tribes and culture. Or do you guys want to add anything to the stuff we talked about on settlement stuff?
Probably
It was
not
on
that one.
settlement and domain management.
Um,
Anything you want to just add?
no.
Okay. Settlement and domain selection is coming up very soon.
Yeah.
I will stress, make sure you get your layaway stuff paid off next month. That'd be a good month to do that in. We'll just
Sure.
leave it at that.
Okay. Yes.
All right, tribes and culture. So this section is focused on tribes and cultural things. I imagine that Souzou is going to be answering a lot of these because this is kind of his domain. When we get into like farming and water stuff like that, I think there's going to be more stuff, contracts, crafting. When we get into crafting, Death will be able to answer a lot more of those. So let's talk about tribes and culture.
All right.
Some tribes of man have very big size differences. Will this have an in-game effect for skills like climbing, jumping, sneaking, and hiding?
Absolutely. You're not going to be hiding as a Yoru. So if you like stealth play, don't bother with Yoru. Like, they're giant. And we're very realistic when it comes to things like physical constraints, because it's more interesting that way. As a Yoru, you're going to be able to just die. You're so large, you're very strong. You can do a lot of things that other people can't, but hiding is not your forte. And
But would it be entirely off the table?
to hide,
Yeah.
it's almost entirely off the table, yes. Because you're like 7 feet tall. And if you can find something that's over 7 feet tall that you can hide behind, then sure. But I mean, you've got semi-translucent white skin, so you're already reflecting tons of light. As much light as something could, and you're 7 feet tall or more. And you're really heavy.
Hello, Vi.
Hi.
So there's,
Are you interrupting us?
Yeah, I am interrupting you because I just want to remind you that the design journal that we're doing next is actually on tribes. So we
So
haven't
just-
actually released all that information that you're telling people
Yes.
right now about the art.
Specifically, the coloring and the fact that they're translucent
No,
and their
we-
skin is white blue.
I want you
Spoilers!
Sneak peek, you guys.
Sneak peek. That's okay.
but
It's
that's
fine.
all you get.
No,
I mean,
no. We will march onward.
Miguel,
Yeah.
what if you roll a nat 20 on this section of stealth?
great. If we transfer this game to, like a pen and paper, and we add die rolls, then sure.
I mean, we could just spend the entire Q&A talking about tribes, which we will.
I mean,
do.
there are a couple of questions. Our next Q&A, I'm just gonna say it now.
You're just calling it now.
I'm just calling it out. Our next public Q&A is gonna be on tribes. So,
Dun, dun,
Watch it
dun.
not be on tribes.
oh, it
Watch
will be. It is on tribes this time.
Okay.
It better be on tribe, Miguel. It better be on tribe.
Okay, it'll be on
Okay,
tribes.
carry on.
Fine. All right. Yes, it'll have an effect. You have to respect the various attributes of the tribes, who I will not speak any more of.
It's fine.
The chat is blowing up on tribes.
Good. Next question.
Wow.
Don't
Don't let Vi push you around.
I know, but I'll get in. Well, actually, you're right.
I am not.
If you're not, I'm fine. Let's talk all about tribes.
Okay, well,
I'll get the screenshots.
let's start with the next question.
Don't forget buildings. If size does make a difference, then sure it would affect how buildings are built in different areas to accommodate the posture of those who live in the area.
Size matters.
Damn Skippy. That's it's very much true.
Kipik?
Yeah,
You're in a Kipik house?
What does that mean? I'm not telling you nothing. But it means something. Okay, moving on. Yes, again, size does matter. It
Thank you for that.
when it comes, I mean,
What?
When it comes to what, Souzou?
so moving on.
Alright.
How much of a problem will we have importing members of another tribe into our lands? Will they face NPC racism that makes their daily lives difficult, such as higher prices, NPCs refusing to deal with them, or outright hostility violence? So that's an interesting question. It's not necessarily something we've discussed
Oh, it is.
from a from like a mechanic standpoint, but I think that things such as prejudice add a layer of depth to any world, and they make him infinitely more relatable. Prejudice is something that we face all the time in reality, and it would be unrealistic for us not to have some elements of that present. Now, whether or not it's higher prices or how NPCs behave and act towards them, we don't know, but there could certainly be challenges regarding different tribes interacting with each other, which is intentional, right? It's again another problem to explore and to try and solve, right? Games are just about solving problems essentially, and prejudice is a problem. So there's a lot of interesting world building implications that.
So in our next Q&A, we'll talk in depth about the different tribes.
Yeah.
We also have a design journal that we're going to be putting together for you guys. And that's going to tell you a lot more about the cultural differences and kind of the relationships between the different tribes. And we'll talk about things like the Dras and the Teresk and kind of how that plays out and some of the other stuff. Because there's, we've spent a non-trivial amount of time, I would say months now, in describing the relationship amongst the different tribes. And we've got a wide array. There are several of them that have known alliances. There are several of them that are known to be hostile against one another, and that's going to bleed over, if we do our jobs right, that's going to bleed over into the game mechanics as well.
Interesting question, though. Very good. Follow-up. How much trouble will royalty have breeding into a different race? Say, for instance, I start in Broodbeer lands and want to breed with a Dross so that my heir appears Dross. Will my heir then have problems governing my lands? First off, did we release the names?
We did.
Okay, good.
Well, I put that out in an update.
Alright.
How did they know all this?
Arasil Demal Count. Thank you for the question.
It's in tight.
Second, I think that there are certain interfaces that
Think Thandris.
Thandris?
Yeah.
Well, there are certain those are cultural issues, but I think there's also questions regarding the mechanical
Sure.
interface,
Right.
and if we would change that based on whether or not you are Dross or not. And I guess that depends on how much of that is being carried out by NPCs and how much of it is being carried out by
I
players.
think you can get some interesting issues like if you're a king and you're from one kingdom and you breed with another one and you have an offspring, right? And let's say we have faction systems in place where it's like your race is hostile to, or your tribe is hostile to another one. If you create an offshoot from a tribe that you're hostile against with your own people, your people, a PC or NPC, will probably not think favorably of it. So you could be inciting an uprising against yourself.
It's possible. I mean,
So
I think that comes down to individual players, at least in some regard, because whether you're accepting of an outsider or not is really a choice that you have to make.
yeah,
And there could be implications, right? There could be consequences to accepting outsiders, good or bad, and so there's certainly we're not going to strong arm you and be like you have to be racist, because that's not reasonable.
yeah. Could it be done? Yes.
We could just
Should it
make them be racist.
I mean, like, you'd have to be careful about how you approach the issue, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you create an offshoot and your royalty, whatever, pick a race that you're aligned with, you know.
Well, there's also survival mechanics, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're, let's say, Broodveer, and you are creating a hybrid baby with a Dross, like the result is not going to be as nearly capable of surviving as another Broodveer child would. So
Yeah.
that's something to keep in mind too.
Fair
Genetics. Can characters from different tribes have kids? Yes, they can. If so, is there going to be an automatic genetic system in place to determine the appearance, attributes, and abilities the child players have as saying on those? So the user experience for that that we've been talking about thus far is that when you breed and you have a child, it does a random sampling of genetics, and you have the opportunity to do a reroll. And the genetics are sampled from both parents, and there are certain constrained genetics. So if it picks the eye color of one of the parents, it'll also pick, for example, the hair color from one of those parents, so that we don't end up with like unnatural combinations. But aside from those constraints, it's not always going to be a direct in the middle of the road like hybrid. It'll always pick some samples from one and from the other and end up with varying combinations. And then when you do a reroll, you get a different sample from the parents. Beyond that, you don't have a lot of ability to customize, other than once it does the random sampling from both parents, you have the ability to move the sliders between the two so that you can end up with something. But many of them are Boolean. So for example, eye color, it's going to be, after the random sampling, you can choose mom's eye color or dad's eye color, but it's not going to create a hybrid color. It's just going to allow you to pick between them. So you do have some degree of customization, but you are still constrained by the bloodline system.
Yeah, I've been doing some real world testing on that too.
Yeah, for example.
And
what do the results say?
my reroll's not working right now.
No rerolls. Although I get the
Girl.
impression that your wife wants to do another reroll, so
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Okay.
more testing.
Thank you, Batista Markelf, or Marself. Tactus asks, with
I think
the
that's
unveiled...
just tactics.
They spelled it wrong. With the unveiled names and sizes of the tribes of Elyria, period, the community has run wild with new names, ice giants, pixies, etc. Fantastic. Do we have an idea if the tribes will deviate from normal human anatomy in this regard? Blue-tinged skin or webbed fingers, or will they instead be different sizes of what is essentially a human being? I've already told you too much! Moving on!
No, that's cool. It's cool. We will talk about this in greater detail, but what we can say
Huh?
is that we were very careful when we were designing the tribes to make sure that they all had a shared silhouette. We want them to all appear to have a common root or a set of common roots, not necessarily one, but a handful of common roots. And so in that regards, it will be variations of a couple of just common core roots, however blue tinged skin confirmed.
No comment. Moving on to farming, everybody. Ashen Moon asks, apart from the usual planting and harvesting in farming, what might be some other mechanics planned for the profession, i.e. cross-pollination through beekeeping, grafting plants, compost, fertilizer, etc. I thought they were going to say composite. They didn't.
Nope.
Etc. Great question, Ashen Moon. I think there have to be other mechanics such as that. Cross-pollination is interesting. Grafting plants, interesting. Compost, fertilizer. Soil, the type of soil makes a difference. So balancing pH levels and stuff like that.
Yeah, it'd probably be like, different types of fertilizer could be used.
Right.
Crop rotations would probably be really good.
Right.
Creating hybrid plants, maybe? There could be something in that farther on.
There is cross pollination
Sure.
in scope.
And certain problems that could arise that we were discussing earlier, like insect invasions and different things like that you'd have to deal with as the problems arise.
Yeah, farming should be more enjoyable than like the traditional MMO is like you find a spot of rich soil. You have seed in inventory, put seed in inventory, come back in a week. Hey, look, a plant. It's not that fun, not that enjoyable.
Exactly.
And there should be something for everyone in COE, right? Like, if you want to figure out how to make like a really special breed of plant that survives in colder climates, being able to have that opportunity to experiment, almost the same as like an alchemist would, figuring out what would work best in which area.
Right.
I think there's a lot of enjoyment that can be found there, and most games just sort of drop the ball on that, where they're just like, yeah, you can farm in our game. Look, you can make plants. You can get food to reuse it. I think there's more to it than that.
Sure.
There definitely is. My
Invasive species.
family has connections with various horticulture. My brother is into horticulture, as is his girlfriend. And one of the things that we talked about previously is how we incorporate that into the design. And so things like germination and the things that are required in order to get the various plants and things that you have in your crops to germinate. And then there is upkeep and maintenance, watering, under what environments will it do better. So like they mentioned before, crop rotation, making sure that the soil is the right type of soil for the type of plant you're planting. And then making sure that with the crop rotation that what you planted previously leaves the correct nutrients for the things that you're planting now. And then there's a lot of things around farming for animal purposes as well, whether
Water
it's
tables.
just care and feeding of animals and other things. So we're still working on the planting and harvesting and care of farming, but we want it to feel like its own game within the game, because we really do understand that. I mean, in a survival game, making sure that you have food and water and things like that is so extremely important that, every settlement is going to have to do it. There's going to have to be people in every settlement who are engaged in this actively.
Yeah.
And if it's not entertaining, then
I guess
that's
everyone's gonna starve.
Then that's going to be a problem, yeah. So,
Yeah.
But I expect it to be, the way it's scoped right now is it's a fairly complex system. We do have bees. There is cross-pollination that can happen. There is all kinds of cool stuff. So we will talk more about that in a future update. All right.
The Mad Hopper asks, will there be irrigation in Elyria? For example, if I am in an arid region some distance away from a river or spring, will I still be able to grow crops? Or if not, will there be a mechanism for which I could dig an irrigation ditch from the source of water to my farm? So that's a constraint of technology, right? Will that technology exist? Possibly. Will it exist at a launch? Maybe not. Will it exist at some point? Probably. But you can't expect that as just a given. You won't have a default irrigation option that allows you to do those things that, by the way, humanity wasn't able to do for the majority of our existence, only until 10,000 years ago, which resulted in the explosion of the human race. Basically the moment, yeah. So it's not a paltry thing.
Yeah, I like in Arc.
Do you have any
It
more
was
to say about
actually.
Nope. I think Jay's going to say it.
It was really interesting in Arc. I actually enjoyed that game quite a bit. It was you see this nice progression of people. When you join, you stay near the oceans and stuff, and then you slowly work inland as time goes.
Sure.
And they actually have irrigation in that game too. And I think that definitely a technological constraint, right? As you learn the tech for it, you start branching out. So you'll start moving farther away from rivers. And I think we're going to get something very similar with COE. People are going to follow the easy sources, or the easy resources, river, streams, lakes, oceans. They'll stay near there. They'll expand out as technology evolves, and they figure out how to do irrigation, how to get pipes moving, things like that. You're going to see people start branching into places that they couldn't have previously gotten to. So I think
Absolutely.
irrigation will actually, and water sources in general, are going to play a huge part with just general populations moving, cities being erected in interesting locations.
I would agree.
All right, moving on quickly. What are your plans for apiary beekeeping? Can we find a wild beehive and use that to set up my own domesticated hive on my property? Will orchards and fruit plantation need benefit from having hives located around them? So our plans for apiary beekeeping, they do exist. Actually, it's kind of a pseudo hobby of mine. Where I live, it's not possible to keep bees. I live inside of a city boundaries, and bees have to be at least 4 stories off the ground or a certain radius from nearby buildings for you to be able to keep bees, so I cannot. But strangely enough, I actually watch a lot of videos on YouTube about beekeeping.
I
don't
didn't
know
know
why.
that.
Yeah, for sure.
More you know.
And so mostly it's because I was afraid of it for a long time, and so I just kind of got this morbid curiosity, and it's actually really compelling to watch the way beekeepers handle the bees. Many of them don't use gloves, they don't use smoke, they don't use anything, because for the most part, honeybees are fairly docile. And so, whether or not you're using an A-frame or a top rack or, whatever it is you're using, the idea of maintaining a beehive is actually pretty interesting. And then, when they swarm, going ahead and taking that swarm and either using it to create a new beehive or just going out and capturing the wild swarm to domesticate to create your own beehive sounds really cool to me. So, that's the way we plan to do that. We've already got some models and some other stuff associated with that, but we haven't introduced them into the actual game yet. Will orchards and fruit plantation need to benefit from having hives located around them? Souzou and I were talking about that earlier today, actually, as a response to this question. And different types of insects was actually the conversation. There was a design meeting on insects in Elyria and how cicada and locust and bees and other things like that were going to interact with the environment. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be pretty interesting.
Thank you, Matt Hopper.
Yep.
Adjlongems.
Agelong gems? I don't know.
Yeah, Adjlongems.
AJ Long Gems.
AJ Long
AJ
gems.
Longems?
Yeah.
How are you so sure about that?
I don't know.
I'm sure.
How will we be
That's
able
my
to,
alt account.
How will we be able to infer the gender of animals for breeding purposes?
Scissors.
That's how you change the gender.
Oh.
As in the wild, in our world, the gender is usually visually deterministic. So, for example, among the dryas elk, for example, the females are smaller and have different antlers. The otter bears, I think, have different claws. The ursiphonts have different tusks.
Right.
There's a couple of things. So, but generally, there'll be a coloring, a coat, a size, or something like that that'll allow you to individually determine. You don't have to like go out and look under the animal's skirts or anything like that. But
Also,
if they're wearing skirts, though, that would be a good indication.
That's it.
We should clarify
No,
right now
you
whether
can't
or not
make
you
that
can.
Right.
Yeah, you can't make that assumption
You
either.
can't make that assumption. That's fair enough. That's right. People specifically asked that the animals be able to wear both skirts
Right.
and not skirts.
People ask that question?
Not for the animals. But in most cases, animals should be visually determined by just looking at them.
Yep.
I have a question concerning alchemy and herbology. How available are different kinds of ingredients for alchemy? For example, can plant-based ingredients only be gathered in the wild or also cultivated in farms, greenhouses? They can be farmed and cultivated as well. In fact, when you're out in the wild and you farm or cultivate or cut down a tree or something like that, as a byproduct of cutting them down, it almost always will give you a seed or something like that. And we do that to kind of help reduce the likelihood of there being deforestation and other things. So generally speaking, when you cut down a plant or a tree, it's going to give you a seed or a sapling that you can then use to transplant that if you want to.
I would say the environment in which that plant belongs is also an important consideration.
True.
And so if you can't, through technology, recreate that environment, you're not going to be able to grow that plant.
You might be able to within the same. Oh, you should be able to within the same biome.
Within the same biome?
Right.
Sure, but if you're talking about bringing something from a desert, or a desert's a bad example. Anyways, moving on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Water and environment is the next section. So let's move on to there.
Okay.
Dr. Tank09 asks, and this was a very highly rated question, by the way. How do water physics work in game? Am I able to actually divert water, pump it, or find it in an aquifer, or is it just a static water table that I don't really have the means to alter?
Yeah.
Water is a really tough problem.
Expensive problem.
It's an expensive problem. If you think about the way water is normally done in games as just like a water plane, it becomes fairly obvious fairly quickly that having things like flooding is extremely expensive, and being able to divert water through means other than irrigation or piping is very expensive. But that being said, we do want people to be able to pump the water and move it around. We do expect the water table to rise and lower during different seasons. And we do expect it to flow and things like that. But your ability to actually divert water, like, let's say, dig a canal and expecting the river to change direction, like we mentioned before, there's no terraforming. So at this point, there is no plan to allow you to create your own rivers and to divert the flow of water.
Basically, the decision is, do you want a game about water or Chronicles of Elyria? Because we can only do one. Water is so expensive, it'd be impossible to do anything but those two options.
So we're pivoting to water.
Pivoting to water. Water sim.
Water World.
Water.
Fantastic.
What?
Well, we
Oh!
know. No, don't do it. We already got it. We've already got the give you. All right. How about water current? So, Nizlar Bloodline asks, how about water currents? Will there be a flowing system in rivers? So, for example, will I be able to cut down trees and float the logs down the river to collect them elsewhere? Will there be changes to currents when it has rained or when the stream river narrows? That one is in the affirmative.
It's easier to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't even require water physics.
Right. So rivers that are based on splines and things like that give us basically a direction that the water is moving. And so when people step into water or when you place objects in the water, allowing it to move with a vector down the flow of the spline is something that's much easier to do. And that creates a couple cool design mechanics for us. For one, throwing barrels in the river and sending them down the river for trade reasons is a really good thing. Also, it creates fast-moving rivers, or the opportunity for fast-moving rivers to be a blockade or a preventative thing for people moving through the wilds. So that actually becomes a barrier for crossing the river, except along specific fjording locations. Fording locations?
Fjording.
Fjording. So yeah.
Fording.
So we do it fording. So we do expect that the water will move. We've got water in right now. It currently does not push you downstream, but that's something that we will be doing. To piggyback, what will river transport and economy be like? Will it be viable to have a trading company using the rivers? Yes.
Yeah, sort of answered in the previous one, except getting back.
Yeah.
It'd probably be a little trickier.
Maybe also interesting though, can it be used to create energy in some way, like a water mill? That's a technology question. Or able to obstruct the flow, like building dams. Not dams, probably. Or reroute the flow, like digging canals. That's a no. All right. Raleigh St. Clair asks, another awkward page turn.
Also, thank you, Sketchy's Baron. Call me Sketchy Baron.
Comey? I don't know. Awkward page turn, and then the deep snowdrifts look really great, but how will movement be worked out in relation to them? In other words, even top AAA MMOs have your avatar basically running on top of the ground. Some make it look more realistic than others, but what you're attempting here with regard to different terrains affecting movement is something else. Keen to hear what you can share about our movement actually interacting with the world. Do we sink in the drifts, for example, as well as moving slowly or move slow on top? So the answer to that is a couple of things. First of all, moving through snowy areas does cause you to fall slightly below the snow. You'll probably be kicking up snow and other particles around the base of your feet. And then over time, we actually keep track. Because movement is affected by the terrain that you're moving across, we constantly have to be checking to see, for the tile that you're standing on, how does that affect your movement speed? So when we do that, we can actually increment things that say, since it started snowing, you've touched this area X number of times. And we can use that to actually lower the amount of snow in that region, so that even when it's snowing out, as players path around, that it starts to wear into the snow and create little like pathable regions where you can see the ground again and stuff like that.
I just want to mention that top AAA MMOs not having mechanical impacts for terrain isn't because they can't do it. It's just a design decision. Like, it's really simple. Games have had modifiers on terrain since like the SNES, probably before that, like the sliding on ice.
The what?
The SNES? SNES?
You don't call it the SNES?
No.
Nobody
you don't
calls
call
it the SNES.
Come on, back me up here, guys.
Nope.
It's the SNES.
Do not
for
back him
sure.
up. It is not.
For sure, the SNES. Anyways, moving on.
Were you alive when the SNES
No,
was
he was
out?
not.
I was alive for sure. Contracts.
Did I just call it the SNES?
You did.
Yeah, you
Son
did.
of-
Boom! Boom!
You were just answering him.
Calico.
Nobody calls it SNES.
Nobody.
Oh, thank
They
you.
say no.
Get out of here, Vi. You're interrupting our freaking stream. Anyways,
Oh.
Caligo Miles Barron asks,
You're still eating.
No, he just started eating, and,
He hasn't
now
stopped.
he's eating it in front of us. Somebody get me a
just how
snack. Something
complex
fruity.
can a contract be? Will,
Toss me something fruity.
Oh,
will it be
why?
possible to include
What? She's
complex
taking it away?
causes in contracts?
Get away.
Take it.
Yeah, there you go.
My snack.
Well, now how am I supposed to eat them?
I think they're trying to tell you not to eat on a stream. I think that was the
Oh my god.
I won't.
Well,
problem
All right,
solved,
then.
I guess.
Wait, I haven't emptied that bag yet.
Too bad.
hey, the table's
Okay.
looking like your desk.
Too bag. Oh my god. All right.
Will it be possible to include complex clauses in contracts? For example, is it possible for, say,
My fishes now.
a count to sell a workshop to a blacksmith on the condition that it will be used to craft a certain amount of tools for the local farmers, in which he or any future owners loses ownership if he does not meet that quota? Likewise, will the contract system allow for structures like shareholding ventures and business investments? Wow.
Yeah, that was a good question.
Two-parter.
So the part one, the contracts can be fairly complex. Using a combination of conjunctions and clauses, remuneration, and conditions on things like time, quantity, locations, and things like that. You can do some pretty cool complex stuff. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is as time goes on and character skill using contracts increases, and as our technology increases, we will increase the scope of what you can do with contracts. We do want to allow there to be some business stuff. So, for example, in order to start a business, you oftentimes need a loan. So that's as simple as, we will give you X amount of resources, and then you have to give us this X amount of resources back by this date or along this interval. And so we can do things like loans. Whether or not you could do things like shareholders and stuff like that, that's a tougher one. That's probably not going to be available at launch. We'll see whether or not we can get there
I'm
eventually.
incorporating my blacksmith.
I'm gonna have to consult with my attorney just to get this system working.
You know what?
correctly.
Yeah, what kind of monsters would we be if we introduced the concept of
Contract
lawyers?
attorneys.
Lawyers. We're monsters. They're actually the final boss, all the lawyers.
Ooh.
That's the vices. They're actually lawyers.
yeah.
They're very. If you're a lawyer out there,
We're sorry.
we're sorry.
If you're a lawyer out there,
No.
all right, well,
All right. Moving on. Crafting is the next section. So, can you tell us how the quality of an item will be defined? Take an example of a sword. How will one sword be better than the other sword? Will there be determined by the skill level of the craftsman or the materials used in forging of the sword? Jay, would you like to address that one?
Combination. It's gonna have to deal with your current skill level and the materials used. So like, if you're really skilled but you have crappy materials and a lot of slag in your castings, it's gonna be a shitty product. It'll break really fast. Opposite being true, you're using really good materials. You're a shitty craftsman. Probably not gonna have a good sword. It's gonna be bulky, overweighted. So you'll probably have to be working with a combination of the two. You want to find the best materials and be as trained as you can be to make something, really good quality.
Follow-up question on this. How will a passerby know that a certain sword, possibly left lying around, say in an unlocked domicile, is of superior quality? Will there be visible aspects to such things?
Yeah, you'd probably be inspecting it, taking a look at it. Then you might actually have to do some tests too, the same as like you would do with a regular sword. There's some people who are going to pick it up and know instinctively a long sword that weighs approximately 12 stones is like the best long sword you could find. It's a trademark when they're perfectly balanced like that. And then you might have to start whacking at a target dummy to see, how many chops it takes to knock the thing down. So you can start grading by guessing things like that. We might go into some more detail with like inspecting. And I don't know if we've covered too much on that yet.
There's also, ultimately what he's getting at is things like decorative type stuff, filigree, whether
Maker's
or not
marks.
there's maker's
Okay,
marks
that's
and
what I
things
was
like
gonna
that.
say,
So, part of it is going to be the material. We also have our rust system and like degradation. So looking at a weapon and being able to determine that it's rusted versus not rusted is going to give you an idea of the oxidization of the metal and things like that. Whether or not it visually looks like it's starting to break along the edges or whether or not it still looks like it's in pristine shape. So you'll be able to tell visually. Obviously, if you look at a finely crafted weapon like a rapier that's got a really nice cross guard on it versus just kind of like a standard iron longsword, you're going to be able to tell that one was done by a significantly better crafter with better resources. So you should be able to identify visually, but as Jason was saying, sometimes it's going to be a matter of going out and using it to really understand what's different about it. Is there any sort of, Aim and Fire asks, is there any sort of gear progression? What sort of gear discrepancy will there be between the most well-equipped player versus those with average or below gear? Do you want to tackle that one?
Discrepancy in level between it?
so the people with bad gear won't
yeah.
have any, and
Like, gear progression should happen sort of naturally, but I don't see it quite the same as, like, standard games take it, to where it's like, oh, you have the common items, now you're going up to master quality and so on. Like, if you're a blacksmith, you're going to progress as your skill progresses. If you have money to buy it, you can go out and make trades and barter services to get better items. So it really all depends. It should scale with your character's experience.
Let me ask you a follow-up question to help kind of get to where I think they're going with this.
Yeah.
What would you imagine would be the differences between a low-quality item and a high-quality item? Is it going to increase your strength by 500? Like,
No.
what do we do? What would you say is a sign of a high-quality item, and why would a player want a high-quality item versus a low-quality item?
So, like with COE a lot, it's like you have lifespans and sort of duration is a big one, right? Like, high quality for me in a game like this would be something that would last a long time. So I'd want an item that would hold up its edge over a long time. I want one armor that would protect me for a while because it's a better investment for me as a player. The quality is basically how well it functions at what it does and how long it can do that. So getting to that point will take some time. You'll have to learn or trade or get it whichever way you can, whether legal or not. And yeah, it should scale with time essentially. So we don't want like a new player coming in getting decked out entirely. And in all honesty, it won't make as much difference if you have someone in like the best gear in the world versus the worst gear. Because it's still going to rely on your skill as a player and how you use it and what you do with it to make good use of it. So it's not like you can get twinked out and be like, you can't kill me, I'm a level 1 character walking around killing dragons.
there's also a technological implication. People with more advanced technology will have better gear.
Yeah, there's like, metalworking versus just blacksmithing, machining and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think ultimately the point is that, gear progression in Chronicles of Elyria isn't really a thing. You know, the gear progression is a matter of making sure you have the right tool for the job and making sure that the quality and durability of the armor and the weapons and the tools that you're using are higher, so that they don't break as quickly. They're situationally better, you know, and that sort of thing. So people are going to be cycling through equipment more frequently in this game than they would be in many games, but not because they're trying to upgrade their gear to get the better stats and stuff like that. Just because, you know, in a game that has this type of realism in a closed, finite economy-based world, you know, when your armor gets damaged, you can only repair it so many times, and then it just becomes too thin to repair, and you have to replace it. So, all right. Orad from Norheim here. Can you describe what will the process for a new building be built will look like? For example, does someone need to carry the resources close to the building? Will a character get allocated to build the structure and do nothing else? How does the time for it to come up work? How will the visuals of the process look like? Do we see a character putting the pieces together, or does it just sort of build by itself? I was going to answer that.
Oh, okay. But I feel like that's something that's better answered by actually like showing them at some point.
I mean, for sure.
Right. Why not wait until then? I mean, we can describe it, but it's going to ultimately not do as good a job as just showing it.
Okay.
But if
It's a highly rated one.
okay, fine. Answer it if you want.
All right. So, as he's alluding to, I mean, there's the architecture and then there's the building, and these are two separate things. Architecture is using the architecture tool to go ahead and define the blueprint for what it is that you are trying to build. Once you've gone ahead and created a blueprint for something, either you or somebody else that you give the blueprint to can use it along with the necessary resources to lay a foundation. When you do that, it gives you the typical highlighted area that shows you kind of what the framing is going to look like. And then when you place the foundation, if it's on an area where the terrain is off slightly, it'll raise the terrain up to match the foundation in certain areas so that you get a nice flat surface for the foundation. And then examining that will give you a list of resources that you need, and the resources are going to be components for the building. So you're going to need things like the siding, you're going to need the framing, you're going to need, you know, interior components and flooring and stuff like that. And it's usually going to come in the concept of like you're going to need 15 A-frames, you're going to need X amount of siding and stuff like that. And so then what you have to do is you have to go out and you have to build those individual components. The best way to do that is to bring the resources on site, so you're not lugging lumber and like buildings that or like components that you've built on site. So usually you'll go out and gather a bunch of lumber, gather a bunch of stone, gather a bunch of slate or whatever else is that you need, bring it on site, process it there, create the 2x4s of the beams, construct the frames out of it, and then start to put the frames up. And so as you're attaching the frames, you should see it kind of generally go up, much like you would see a building in our world go up, with like one wall at a time or one segment of a wall at a time, until eventually it's fully complete and then your building is done. There will be certain materials that are fixed that are required, such as the framing. In order to support the number of floors that you want and things like that, will require certain types of materials. Other things are more aesthetic and are cosmetic, and so you can actually swap those out. Like you could potentially use different types of siding depending upon what biome you're in. Yes. You good? And so it's a kind of an implicit question here is it a single person job? It is not. Much like in our world, you're generally going to need people of different skills and kind of responsibilities. There's going to need to be masons. There's going to need to be lumberjacks and carpenters and architects and things like that. So it's generally going to be a multi-person process to build a building in this game. All right. Will I be able to move dirt, not just have it disappear when I mine or dig it out of the way? If I can, will this dirt work in a fashion that allows me to use it as sod? We've been going back and forth on this one for a while now. People were concerned that people would dig out tunnels out of their basement and have this kind of vast network with no indication that it's happening because there's no mounds of dirt. Also, sometimes dirt is useful to have for different things. I think I'm leaning at this point on actually requiring you to move the dirt around. However, we haven't started on the mining system yet, specifically the tunneling system. So we don't have a good user experience for what that's going to look like yet. But
Subject to change.
Subject to change.
Yeah.
So as we get into the actual tunneling system, then we'll readdress that and we'll answer the question better then. Sarah Biera. What information can you tell us about alchemy and its possibilities? That's another one we've been debating a lot. I'm not going to be able to answer that directly. What I can tell you is kind of what the conversation is that we're having. crafting in this game, we want it to be as visceral and immersive as possible. You know, when it comes to smelting your ore, we want to be able to allow you to mix and match and create, you know, unique alloys. We also want people to be able to mix ingredients together in a pot in order to experiment and create different types of, you know, alchemical liquids and things like that. But the problem is whenever you work off of a formulaic system of percentages and processes, it's easily consumable, and you get, you know, 100,000 people on a single server, and very quickly they're able to exhaust every possible combination just by trying them all in kind of a distributed network, which is really cool at consuming the content really fast, but ultimately it takes away from the enjoyment and the excitement of being able to discover these things over time, which implies that we'd want to do something more recipe-based, where you actually have to have an in-game physical object like a pattern or recipe in order to quote-unquote learn how to do something. That allows us to control the rate of consumption a little bit more, but it also somewhat takes away from people's ability to experiment and learn things at a rate at which they want to. So we're trying to find a good hybrid between those two, and we haven't landed on exactly a system that we're happy with those yet. But that at least lets you know where we are in that system. What level of active player maintenance will buildings require before falling into disrepair? Also, does building material increase or shorten building longevity? That was from Dr. Feargood. What level of active player maintenance will buildings require depends upon what biome you're in, what type of building you built, and the quality of materials that you're using. High quality materials in a biome that's compatible with the materials that you're using will require only periodic maintenance, but if you try and build something in a biome that doesn't make sense or with lower quality materials, you might find you're having to repair more frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah, have a castle in the forest that's going to last a while.
But have a castle in a swamp,
Not so
it's
much.
going to sink.
Ask
And
Marla.
then you're going to try and build another
So
castle,
you admit there could be a castle in a swamp?
Bum bum.
but it's going to sink.
Be at the bottom of the swamp.
It'll be in the swamp.
Yeah. All right.
Riptoes.
Riptos asks, how dependent will crafters be on other crafters? Is there a way to be self-sufficient, or will it be an extreme case like the repopulations crafting system, which makes you dependent on 2 to 3 other people just to craft a subcomponent of a component of the item you want to make? It's a combination of the two. You know, if you're making a sword, you can cross-train in skills. You can learn enough in carpentry that you can do the woodworking to make a good handle. You can do enough in metalworking to be able to make the blade and pommel, and you can effectively specialize in being a sword maker. On the other hand, if you're trying to build a house, which would require, you know, wood and masonry and potentially metalworking and glassworking or glass blowing and things like that, there's going to be too much there for one person to be able to effectively learn on their own. So I guess it depends on what it is that you're trying to build.
Yeah, for sure. I like these questions.
You like the religion ones?
I like the last one.
All right.
Dr. Feargood, can you expand upon how religion will work in this game? If a large player base begins to worship a deity that is not part of the war, will they miss out on the tangible rewards that other deities may have provided? No comment, I believe is our response to that. No comment.
I put it on here so that we could comment.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely no comment.
So I prepared this list. So if it's on this list, that means I
You wanna answer it?
at least wanted to address it. So can you expand upon what?
Sorry, just one question since a lot of people in the chat seems to be really restless. Are there any PvP questions in that packet?
There are.
So
Well,
they
there
just
you
want to
go,
skip to the
people.
PvP
Just
stuff?
Well,
wait.
PvP combat is right here.
Just a side note, I saw this list. I probably have to go at 5:30.
Okay, I don't know what time it
We
is.
said
Right?
it'd be an hour, right?
What time is
It's
it?
5:17.
So we've been going on for
So
over an hour?
It's been an hour since we started the show.
I have to,
All right.
I also have to leave at 5:30.
All right, well, let's go through these really quickly then. Can you expand on religion a little bit? How do they work? You have to worship a religion and deity that exists in the game because the mechanics work similar to other mechanics. While you can roleplay worshiping a religion that doesn't exist,
Or melon.
you will suffer not getting any benefits from that. Will I be able to sacrifice animal, NPCs, or other players for religious purposes? Yes.
You can try. No promises that it'll do anything.
All right, advancement progression.
Yeah.
Aim and Fire asks, will there be any catch-up mechanics to help players who have less time to play than others? For example, will there be any system in place that helps close the gap between someone who can only play 2 hours average daily versus someone who plays 12 hours average? So we have a couple mechanics. There's the OPCs to make sure that you're at least able to do kind of the more mundane tasks while you're offline. And then there's bolstering, which makes it so that when you play with other family members, that your attributes are escalated to that of the highest member of your little party that's also in your family. There is no catch-up mechanic beyond those currently. Freelancer asks, what kind of pay-to-win options are we possibly going to see for players who have more money than playtime? Will it be possible to obtain gear, experience, skill points, or anything that could be given an advantage in PvP combat for someone with money versus someone who does not drop hundreds of dollars on the game? There is not. We do not have any mechanics in-game currently.
You could send us cups and they'll get on stream. That's the equivalent of pay to win. Because then you're on stream. That's it.
It doesn't have you win though.
Yeah, no.
That's not winning.
We do not have any mechanics. Our mechanics right now for allowing people to opt into different player experiences for exposition ends with the end of exposition. So once the game begins, you cannot buy anything from us, whether that be skill boosts, crafting items, components, or anything like that that would give you some kind of an advantage.
You're saying I can't
because
give
we're-
you money for a fancy hat that makes me hide better?
You cannot.
Are you saying we're not charlatans?
Ouch. We're not.
Oh, good.
All right, NPC interaction and communication. In the past, it's been briefly mentioned there are multiple languages spoken by characters in various parts of the world, and that these languages might play a role in the game's mechanics. Could you elaborate on the scope of such a system, if it's still planned to be in the game? That was a super highly rated question. I think it was one of the top rated questions. So it is still in the game. The general idea is that members of different tribes or cultures will be able to speak different languages. That'll show up differently in chat for everyone else, and exposure to those other languages over time will allow you to gradually pick up on more and more of that language until eventually your character will understand the language and thus communicate the information to you. That's true of NPCs and things like that as well. So they'll often try and use languages in order to mask information from you. You'll probably find things written in different languages with different alphabets and runic systems, all to throw you off and make it difficult for you to figure out what the information is actually saying. How will speech work? Will there be a speech bubble over player's head, or will there be a chat in the bottom left like other MMOs to show chat? That was a fairly highly rated question, so I wanted to at least throw it in so that I could say, not going to answer that yet.
What? I did the same thing.
Well, no, this one actually I specifically did that, and the reason I wanted to say that is because one of the things that people often overlook with this game is that it's more complex than they think. And the reason I say that is, in most MMOs, when you look at the chat box in the bottom left, it tells you Caspian says so and so, Death says so and so, Souzou says so and so. What does the chat box say when you don't know who anybody is? A man says this. A man says that.
A girl.
A girl. Yeah, together. A girl says this. So, that really doesn't help you identify who in the region around you is actually saying this information. And so there is more work that needs to be done on our end to make sure that you are able to differentiate between what's being said in the chat window versus what's being said visually on screen. And even if we were to have the option to turn off, for example, like chat bubbles or something like that, there's still this problem of identifying when you're reading chat who it is on the screen that's actually saying those things. So there's a certain amount of UI, UX that needs to be done there in order to make sure that those things are paired consistently. We're aware of the problem. We know it exists. We are working on solving it in the most eloquent and interesting way we can, but it is not a solved problem yet. Besides basic needs that NPCs will have, food, sleep, work, will NPCs want to improve themselves? Yes, they will. If we build schools or establish guilds, is there a chance that NPC will join that faculty?
Yeah.
Yes, there is. Can we hire NPCs to clean and maintain our property? If they're looking for work. If so, will they be able to get resources by themselves at our expense, or will they request a supply of whatever they need?
It's a matter of contracts.
Yeah, I think that's more about whether or not the
Are you
contract
supplying? Are you supplying the supplies? I guess is the question, right? As an employer, it's your decision.
All right. Angry Shooter asks, can we know how much customization and freedom we'll have concerning the offline player character? What will we be able to make our OPC do and not do? Any details on that? How much customization and freedom you'll have for your offline players is quite a bit. We're working on a node-based scripting language that allows you to visually program what you want your OPC to do. We will use a very, very similar system for the development of our own AI. Or I say we are using the fundamental, the basis for that node system for our own AI. And what will we be able to make our OPC do and not do? You cannot make your NPC do things that would gain you skill in an activity, so they can only do things which no longer provide you skill benefits, and you cannot tell them to do things in an automated fashion, like go home. Your NPC will never be able to do things that your OPC will never be able to do things that you as a player could not do. So when you want to do things like go home, instead of just saying go home, you have to tell it go this direction for this distance, or go this direction until you see this, and then turn south or then turn north. So you actually have to know where you are in order to know where you want to go. How can we test our scripts if we can't be logged in? The prologue. So we are looking at providing you the offline demo. At some point in the future, people will also be able to use that to test their OPC scripts. Will there be an option to inspect player skills or them to somehow prove what their skill level is? Example, I would want to know if Blacksmith is actually good at what he does, my bodyguard is a skilled fighter, etc. two ways. Number one, you can ask them to demonstrate, prove that they know how to use the combat techniques, prove that they know how to craft the thing that they say they can. The other way you can do that is through schools and other things. One of the benefits of joining an organization like a school is that they can provide certifications or other awards or merits or ribbons and things like that. And so at the honor of the academy, based on the honor of the academy, if a prestigious organization says, I certify that this person has mastered these skills, then you can be fairly confident that they have in fact mastered them. That doesn't mean they couldn't forge them, but what benefit would a fighter have, a guard have in convincing you that they're capable of defending you, only to go out and get themselves killed in the process of doing so?
Yeah, unless they're really good runners.
Yeah,
it's
right.
thieves!
You don't have to outrun the thieves, you only have to outrun the person you're guarding.
Right?
All right. Will the game allow for harsh and rude interaction between players? This is Yernero's question. Will the game allow for harsh and rude interaction between players without a report button looming over all? Or will players or people be able to act how they please when interacting and therefore suffer the social punishments of doing so rather than the banhammer? I brought this in because this is kind of a question that's been coming up quite a lot. We've been very specific about making sure that people know that when talking in-game using say, shout, whisper, that you're in character. At the same time, when you're using general chat channels that you've created, not general chat channels, when you're using the chat channel system that we're providing, that it's done using your user alias, and that's out of character. So you've got an in-character and an out-of-character environment. We did that specifically because we know that this game deals with sensitive topics. Sexism, racism, religion, the ability to declare war, family murder, like, patricide, patricide, matricide. I want to overthrow my family's dynasty, so I'm going to kill my in-game mother, that sort of stuff. People making threats like, I'm going to kill you and your whole family. Like, those are things that in our world would be considered completely taboo, probably get the authorities called on you and things like that. But we still want those things to be available.
It's funny though.
We still want those things to be available to be done in-game and remain in character, but we want people to be able to disassociate between what's in character and what's out of character. So at this point, we're generally going to take a hands-off approach to things that are going on in character. So while we certainly wouldn't condone players going around being rude to everyone, if that's the role you want to play, if that's the character persona you want to adopt, then we would expect people to deal with you in-game as you're interacting with them in-game. However, doing that out of character using the chat channel system will get you punished pretty quickly. Threatening to attack somebody or to insulting people in and out of character communication channel would be against our code of conduct and will be moderated accordingly. Cool. Will it be possible to declare to a normally hostile NPC that you want to negotiate? For example, walking up to an NPC bandit hideout without them killing you on site. It really depends on the psychology of the NPC. If you're walking up to an NPC bandit hideout, they're probably going to attack you on site in the same way that if I walked into like an enemy military camp, they're not going to try and negotiate with me. So there's that. All right. We still have a lot of cool stuff to go on, talking about family and alpha beta and timeline stuff and design experiences and organizations and ocean travel stuff, but there were some questions specifically around PvP and combat. So it is 5:30. Let's see if we can get through these like 1, 2, 3, 4 questions, 5, 6, 7 questions as quickly as we can. What sort of incentives will there be for open world PvP? Will there be worthwhile objectives to fight over, such as land, world bosses, trade runs, or events? Will there be trade runs which are very profitable to run and or pirate? Will there be safe zones which do not allow for PvP? What sort of incentives will there be for open world PvP? I think you named most of what would normally be considered open world PvP incentives, but something to keep in mind is we're not really encouraging open world PvP. While we make it an option, we're not going to make that an objective. In the same way that there's not really incentive in our world to walk around outside and beat people up. Like, does it happen? Yeah. Is it incentivized? Not really. So will there be worthwhile objectives to fight over, such as land? Absolutely. However, you generally want to do that legally. Will there be world bosses? There will be, but that's not really player versus player. Trade runs, there will certainly be trade routes. Can you fight over the trade routes? You can burglar, like you can pickpocket, you can do all those things. They're generally not considered positive behavior. Those are deviant, but they are doable. Mm-hmm. Will there be trade runs which are very profitable and or pirate? I assume that there would be. Will there be safe zones which do not allow for PvP? Really no area allows for PvP unless you're in wartime. However, there's no mechanics that prevent you from doing it anywhere. Ammon Fire asks, what sort of restrictions will there be on PvP? Generally none. None or a lot, depending upon how you look at it. Are we able to freely engage anyone at any time? Freely, the game will not stop you, but it's not something that's condoned. Or will there be severe restrictions in place that punish those who like to PvP or pirate? There will be severe punishments for people who PvP or pirate. While rewarding Care Bears who prefer to avoid PvP at all costs. The use of Care Bears, wow. The game is generally not designed to be, while we allow open world PvP everywhere, the game is designed for player versus player conflict to happen in ways that do not require a sword and shield. There are ways to affect other people socially, economically, religiously, culturally, politically. There are all kinds of really cool ways where you can impact another player that doesn't require hitting them with a stick or a metal blade.
But it's certainly an option.
That is an option. Will there be arenas? Yes. Ranked or unranked? Yes. With rewards? Yes. There are gladiatorial combat and things like that. Is PvP going to be spontaneous and open world? I expect that it will be. What are the plans for archery and other long-range attacks, such as knife and dart throwing? Currently, we're looking at both knife and dart throwing, as well as just improvised throwing. So basically picking up an object and throwing it at someone. Archery is more complex, needing to keep in mind things like wind, resistance, range, strength, like draw strength, the type of bow you're using, and velocity latency. So an object that moves, the bullet's not necessarily going to track. So you also need to kind of keep in mind that your target may not be where you think they are. So you need to
hit scan.
Aim in advance, right? So in other words, ranged is going to be super interesting, very challenging, but also very productive. Are there plans for multiple arrow types, such as fire arrows or arrows with ropes attached? Yes. And lastly, will it be possible for highly skilled archers to take down key targets in a single well-placed shot? Yes.
I mean, if you couldn't do that, what's the freaking point, right?
We make it challenging because of the risk-reward trade-off. If it's really hard to hit a moving target from far away because of like the need to recognize wind and other things like that, then you should be rewarded for being able to hit them. Adam Burfoot said, as it's a topic near and dear to me and many others, but there has been little by the way of targeted information on it. What's the studio's vision on player versus player combat, both at the macro level and the micro level? For example, were I a group who simply wants to be militarily focused and my win condition revolved around player versus player combat, what win conditions or options of progression do you see there being for me? So on a smaller scale, there's things like gladiatorial combat, there are mercenaries or paid guards, all of which could be legal. There are bounty hunters who go out and collect things from people. On a larger scale, there are, again, mercenaries who go around and volunteer their sword for different government organizations. You could be a government in general, aiming to conquer the world.
As I said, imperialism.
Imperialism, yeah. Imperial expansion. Like, nothing says you can't. While you might not legally be able to just invade another kingdom and conquer them, and you might risk the wrath of other kingdoms coming in and getting involved, that doesn't mean you can't do it. So if you feel like you can withstand the onslaught of all of the other kingdoms, then you can certainly just invade somebody. Mounted combat was the feature voted in the Soulbound Studio provided survey as the second most desired by the backers in Kickstarter. It was placed at the very tail end of the stretch goals and missed the December 31st deadline, even though we've passed that threshold now. My question is mounted combat 100% assured of being in the game at some point in the future, as long as in-game group researchers discover it, or could the feature be cut at the discretion of Soulbound Studios? What? The goal is for all the features that were on that list to be in the game at some point. So at this point, we don't have an intention of cutting mounted combat. The main reason that we cut mounted combat is because there was a lot more involved in that system than people thought, both from a design standpoint, from an asset standpoint, and largely from an animation standpoint. When we talk about mounted combat, we're not talking about just being able to run up to somebody and hit them with a sword. We're talking about being able to use the same techniques and other things that we do in our normal combat system, but while on a mount, which requires a completely new set of animations for every weapon set you could possibly have while on a mount.
And possibly every mount, too, considering, war trisons and ursiphants. And
right.
So you now have different heights, so how does your character interact with someone who's low on the ground?
Right. So there's a ton of things. There's also design mechanics associated with that, making sure that people who are unmounted aren't immediately killed by anybody who's on a mount anytime. There are specific weapons, pikes and polearms, that are designed to be defensible against mounts, but without introducing those specifically, those weapons aren't often used in combat except when against mounts. So there's a lot that went into the design and the decision to move that stretch goal back to the end. Our goal was that as we get a new animator, we get new engineers and other people to kind of help bring the other design stretch goals in place, then we would have enough human resources to go ahead and do the mounted combat. We didn't quite get there, but it is something that we're planning on doing at some point. When do you plan to release more information about how exactly the mechanics for PvP will work, i.e. AI settings for NPCs and the ideas and concepts behind Kingdom versus Kingdom Warfare compared to 1 versus 1 gameplay? So I know there's a follow-up question about our PAX beta. I'll just go ahead and answer them both at the same time. The PAX demo and our PAX demo last year showed a very early iteration of our combat system, which was entirely based on mouse clicks for attack combinations. The idea of dodging and parrying and blocking was in there, but it wasn't well executed at the time, so it wasn't something that was actively used by people during the PAX demo. We've got a lot of other cool mechanics that we're looking at throwing in for our combat, and we hear people's concerns and complaints over the combat system as it was shown at PAX. That again was not intended to be our final form. There's other work that we're doing on it. We just wanted to be able to get the characters in game so that they could hit each other, take damage, lose vitality, and stuff like that. But Souzou, Death, and I are actively iterating on our combat system right now. We're having a lot of design meetings, or we're working on prototyping different mechanics, and I guarantee you the system that we show you upon completion is going to be significantly more rich and entertaining than the one we have now. So more information will be coming soon, but we need to make sure that we have some more animations ready for it. Basically, it's undergoing a significant rewrite because we like the ideas that we had, but not the implementation. So, yeah, more coming on the combat system. Guys, it's 5:30ish. We've tried to get through as many questions as we can. You guys asked amazing questions this time. We will try and address as many of these as we can on Reddit itself or on our forums. Thank you again for joining us for our Q&A, our open Q&A on really any topic you guys had. Again, I'm Jeremy. This is Souzou and Miguel and Jason. With Soulbound Studios. Thank you guys for joining us. The next Q&A will be coming up next month, and it will be on Tribes. Tribes.
Yay.
Thanks, guys.
See ya. Are we still on? Are we cut yet?
No.